In almost every single country in the world, silent cinema is underrepresented on DVD, reflecting a wider lack of critical interest. One of the few exceptions to this rule, along with the US, is the Soviet Union. It is a testament to the power and originality of early Russian cinema, which has managed to overcome prejudice against silent film and association with a totalitarian regime, that it remains so cherished in the pantheon of world cinema classics. Soviet films of 1920s did much to define the cinematic vocabulary of modern Hollywood, producing a range of effects designed to emotionally manipulate the audience. It is a debt that's not forgotten, and even today, many of the American directors have at various times paid direct or indirect homage to the Russian cinematic masters. Although many of these Soviet works were intended as propaganda and many of the directors truly believed in communism, the films usually brought out fiercely independent streaks in their creators. In fact, most of the classics of the period went down badly with the communist authorities of the time, who disagreed with the director's own vision of what communism should and shouldn't be, and distrusted the film language of these works. Ironically, as these works were getting bad reception in Moscow from the apparatchik, they were also being censored by the West, and restoration of films from this period to their proper original form is still ongoing. The history of the Russian cinema may be divided into three periods: the Russian Empire period, the Soviet Union period, and the period after economic reform and the fall of the Soviet Union. The cinematograph was first brought to the Russian Empire by the Lumiere brothers in the very same year it was invented. Since Russia and other Eastern European countries were initially dependent on Western Europe and the United States for film technology like camera, projector, and film stock, their films of the first 2 decades were not as technically or aesthetically innovative as the movies of their Western counterparts. The first films were shown in Russia in 1896, and within 10 years, domestic interest in cinema going was so strong that it led to the beginning of domestic production. Exhibitors relied heavily on well-made imports from other countries. 90% of the films shown before World War I were imported. With its origin as a novelty in stalls at fairs, cinema was seen as entertainment rather than an art form. The first native production company was founded in 1907. The outbreak of the First World War caused decline in both film production in Russia and import of foreign films. However, by the time of October Revolution, there was a small but thriving national film industry, producing films inspired by the style of other countries. For example, the first feature Russian film, Stenka Razin, made in 1908, imitated the French-style film d'art. In 1920, Mosfilm, the biggest film company in Russian history, originated from combining 2 nationalized private companies. The filmmakers were supposed to realize goals of communism and were strictly supervised by the party censorship. Interestingly, making films according to the predominant ideology did not prevent the filmmakers from experimenting with the film substance. The Soviet filmmakers engraved their names in film history with a masterpiece of both formal sphere and construction sphere. The history of Russian filmmaking is in several important aspects the exact opposite of American film history. The high point in the history of Russian film comes during the early Soviet era. However, though Soviet film was born during the Russian Revolution, the form it would take was not clear until the 1920s. The few short years between about 1920 to about 1925 saw a breathtaking change in Russian, now Soviet filmmaking. This rapid growth is all the more remarkable for the existence of stiff opposition to the new Marxist regime from the West. The period between 1925 and 1930 saw sweeping changes in Soviet film, but this time in the opposite direction, from experimentalism to totalitarianism. Formally beginning in 1928, state policy increasingly dictated that films be made so that they could be immediately understood by the masses. In general, the state exerted and increasingly control over the filmmaking industry. The advent of sound in late 1920s was at least temporarily a setback for formalist directors arguing over the best visual ways of getting meaning across to an audience. Dialogues and other soundtrack devices seemed to reduce the need for more subtle visual, especially editing and cues. One of the most prominent directors and theorists of the Soviet film school during this time was Sergei M. Eisenstein. He was a passionate student of Lev Koloshov, the film director and theorist considered as a father of Soviet cinematography. In the 1930s, Eisenstein created revolutionary trilogy: Strike in 1925, Battleship Potemkin in 1925 again, and October 1928. Yet, none of the film he made exist in the final form in which he wanted them. The negatives of his first two features, Strike and Battleship Potemkin, were sold by Russia to Germany to raise hard currency and were censored and edited there. His next two features, including October 1927, had to be radically revised in an attempt to meet official approval. Two films from the 1930s were never completed. His attempt to rehabilitate himself, Alexander Nevsky, 1938, was shown to Stalin before it was completed, and the dictator was so pleased with the unfinished work that nobody dared alter it further. However, of all these works, his greatest artistic achievement is considered to be Battleship Potemkin. The film's plot is loosely based on the mutiny aboard the titular war vessel in response to appalling conditions and an uncaring and aloof officer class. The artistic greatness of Eisenstein lied in his ability to unite the film content with its form in an extremely coherent way. He achieved this through montage, which meant to juxtapose alternatively the opposite shots. One sequence from this film which is highly acclaimed for its technique is a massacre on the Odessa steppe. Odessa in the film comes out in the support of the militant sailors, and the Tsarist army brutally suppresses the jubilant shoreline encouragement. This famous Odessa steppe sequence is in fact a fictional invention by the film's makers rather than a historical event. The battleship then heads out to the sea. In the final act, another memorable and endlessly copied sequence, the battleship faces the combined might of the Imperial Navy with its red flag fluttering proudly in the wind. The true end was rather more humiliating, with the sailors docking in Romania and being arrested and transferred to Russia. Eisenstein's conception of montage was that by understanding that the shot is the basic unit of filmmaking, you could play the audience's emotion like a violin, making them feel rage or calm as the director desired. This, for Eisenstein, was the basis of a revolutionary cinema galvanizing the masses to support the political change in the society. The film was seen as so effective at exciting the emotions against the domination of capitalism that it was banned in some parts of the world. In England, the film couldn't be shown until 1954. At the beginning of the Soviet era and before the high moments of Eisenstein and Pudovkin, Soviet filmmakers and industry bureaucrats tried to fit the new Marxist ideology with the new art form in various ways. Among others, they denied that it was an art form, but not to the same reason the Western intellectual elite dismissed film. The Soviet constructivists, for example, did not think film was uncultured, but an essentially new way of presenting the world without all the bourgeois apparatus of the legitimate stage. Unlike aesthetic elitists, they liked the fact that movies appealed to the masses. The Stalinist cultural revolution continued for several years. The tendency to erase formal experimentation with simple films that would be accessible to the masses. Stalinists recognized the fact that film was a powerful tool of propaganda. The 1930s saw the compulsory purchase of projectors by Soviets and a consequent rise in film attendance all over the Soviet Union. In the 1930s, the trend continued towards what would in 1934 ultimately and officially be called socialist realism, producing tractor films, which meant monotonously unvaried movies about the exploitation of the virtuous worker by the bourgeois and the ultimate triumph of the working class. These films were increasingly censored and more rigidly scripted. However, the death of Stalin did create a thaw in bureaucratic control of the art in the Soviet Union. The generation of the 60s would include the first set of world-famous Russian filmmakers to emerge since the 1920s, for example, Andrei Tarkovsky. Soviet filmmaking opened up even more with the advent of new rulers and reforms in late 1980s and 1990s. Though entertainment films continued to be made, there were also films critical of the bad old Stalinist days. Some formal experimentalism even returned after being banished for 4 or 5 decades by the state. But let us talk in detail about the work of Andrei Tarkovsky, who made such a dramatic impact on the viewers across. Today, when cinema seems to have drowned in a sea of glamorized triviality, when human relationships on screen have been reduced to sexual intrigue, a sloppy sentimentality, and immorality rules the day, Andrei Tarkovsky appears as a lone warrior standing in the midst of this cinematic catastrophe, holding up the banner for human spirituality. What makes Andrei Tarkovsky class apart is his uncompromising stance that man is not just social but also spiritual being. While in films one might see spirituality as part of the main story or the plot, in Tarkovsky's film it is the plot. It seeps into the very fabric of his films. It can be said that his films vibrate with his own spirituality. As he himself states, in all of his films, the main characters undergo a spiritual crisis. This is particularly evident in his film Stalker, where all of the characters are involved in an intense spiritual struggle.
Пусть исполнится то, что задумано. Пусть они поверят.
While the nature of this struggle is uniquely personal for each of them, the basic objective is the same: to keep the flame of the human spirit within them alive. The character of the stalker in particular is the most fascinating example of the human being struggling to find the right path by using his intuition, that is, by listening to his inner voice. And since most people are used to following only their worldly desires in carving out their path in life, paying little or no attention to this inner voice, Stalker's behavior produces a reaction of bewilderment not only to his companions in the film but also to the majority of the viewers. Instead of rushing through the zone representing life, grabbing and tasting and plundering everything in his path, he proceeds with caution, as though listening within himself, watching for signs to indicate the next move to him, careful not to disturb anything around him. What is it that he is listening to, waiting for, hoping to comprehend? It is the language of the zone, which is the language of life itself, the language in which the Creator speaks to us through life. This is perhaps the most unique quality of Tarkovsky's cinema, which also accounts for his unique cinematic style of incredibly long takes and slowly pulsating rhythm. he is observing the very language of life, as though hoping in this way to hear the language of God.
Вот еще эксперимент. Эксперименты, факты, истина в последней инстанции. Да фактов вообще не бывает, а уж здесь и подавно. Здесь все кем-то выдумано. Все это чья-то идиотская выдумка. Неужели вы не чувствуете? А вам, конечно, до зарезу нужно знать, чья. А почему? Что толку от ваших знаний? Чья совесть от них заболит? Моя? У меня нет совести. У меня есть только нервы. Обругает какая-нибудь сволочь рано. Другая сволочь похвалит еще рано. Душу вложишь, сердце свое вложишь, сожрут и душу, и сердце. Мерзость вынешь из души, жрут мерзость. Они же все поголовно грамотные. У них у всех сенсорное голодание. И все они клубятся вокруг. Журналисты, редакторы, критики, бабы какие-то непрерывные. И все требуют: давай, давай. Какой из меня к черту писатель, если я ненавижу писать? Если для меня это мука, болезненное, постыдное занятие, что-то вроде выдавливания геморроя. Ведь я раньше думал, что от моих книг кто-то становится лучше. Да не нужен я никому. Я сдохну, а через 2 дня меня забудут и начнут жрать кого-нибудь другого. Ведь я думал переделать их, а переделали-то меня по своему образу и подобию. Раньше будущее было только продолжением настоящего, а все перемены маячили где-то там, за горизонтами. А теперь будущее слилось с настоящим. Разве они готовы к этому? Они ничего не желают знать, они только жрут.
There seems to be little reason to attempt an analysis of Tarkovsky's films, since no one can do it better than he himself has already done in his book Sculpting in Time. His films strive to reach out to the spirit within the audience and convey them a spiritual experience which will be unique to each one of them. But in each case, it will be something which will move us on a deep spiritual level, much deeper than emotions. This level of experiencing is similar to a state of nostalgia. Another film by Tarkovsky. The word nostalgia in Russian means a state of unquenchable longing for one's homeland. And since the homeland of the spirit lies far above the earth, nostalgia of the spirit for the light is what inexplicable longing we feel when nothing on earth seems to satisfy us. Nothing seems to come up to that ideal of harmony and beauty, which we carry deep inside us as a vague memory from a distant homeland.
Ну и везет же вам. Боже мой, да теперь вы 100 лет жить будете.
Да. А почему не вечно? Как вечный жид.
Far from being an imaginary place dreamt up by poets, it is a place as real as the earth, and it is precisely the reality of that memory which the poets in all branches of the arts throughout all the ages have tried to convey to us. Tarkovsky himself stated that he was not satisfied with the screenplay for his film Nostalgia until he succeeded in expanding the concept of Russian nostalgia into a more profound global yearning for the wholeness of existence. And it was only then that the entire film came together at last into a kind of metaphysical whole. Let us end today's session with a small clip from one of his films.
Мама!